Imagine a millionaire heir trapped in a world of wealth and rules, where every choice is dictated by appearances and traditions. Now, imagine a determined young woman coming from a completely opposite reality who carries in her heart scars from her family's past, a past that connects their lives in unexpected ways. When Noah Harrington falls in love with Lila Carter, a maid at his mansion, their world collides. But what happens when this love defies prejudice, family expectations, and reveals dark secrets that have been hidden for years? This is a romance where every decision is costly, and love can be the key to freedom, or the beginning of a new battle. Don't blink, because the twists and turns of this story will leave you breathless. Lila Carter's car stopped in front of the Harrington mansion's main entrance, and she looked out the window, admiring the size and opulence of the estate. The mansion was like a monument to power and wealth, with impeccable white columns and gardens that looked like something out of a painting. Taking a deep breath, Lila got out of the car and adjusted her bag. "You're late," said an older man, the team leader, looking at her sternly. "Here, punctuality is not an option, it's mandatory." "Sorry, sir," Lila replied, keeping her tone respectful. "It won't happen again." He led her into the house while explaining the rules. "Invisibility is the rule. Do your work without attracting attention. The Harringtons don't like distractions." Lila nodded, observing the inside of the house carefully. Wealth overflowed in every detail, from the crystal chandeliers to the polished marble floors. It was such a different world from what she knew, but she promised herself that nothing would intimidate her. Later, while tidying up the kitchen, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, he came across a tall man wearing a dress shirt folded at the elbows. His brown hair was slightly messy, and he was holding a mug of coffee. "Are you new here?" he asked with a curious tone. "Yes," Lila replied, trying to maintain formality. "And you must be the boss." He laughed, a light, relaxed sound. "Something like that. My name is Noah." He extended his hand. Lila hesitated before squeezing it. "Lila, pleasure to meet you." "Likewise." "Aye," he said, studying her for a moment before pointing to the book she had left on the counter. "Austen. A classic." Lila replied with a slight smile. "Have you read it yet?" "Some chapters," Noah admitted, "but I never thought I'd find a fan of classic literature here. Some of the best ideas come from where you least expect them," Lila replied, taking the book and putting it back in her bag. Before they could continue their conversation, the team leader entered the kitchen, giving Lila a disapproving look. "Mr. Harrington, I don't want to disturb you, but you have work to do." "Of course," Noah replied, leaving the kitchen, but not before giving Lila one last smile. Lila went back to work, but her mind remained on the brief encounter. Something about Noah's manner seemed different. Despite all the luxury around him, he didn't carry the air of superiority she expected. Still, she promised herself she would keep her distance. After all, she knew well what it meant to cross boundaries in this kind of place. As the sun set and the mansion's lights illuminated the property, Lila couldn't help but feel like that day was just the beginning of something much bigger than she could have imagined. Noah couldn't stop thinking about Lila since their meeting in the kitchen. There was something about her that seemed different from anyone else he had met, a mix of determination and mystery. The next morning, while walking through the mansion's gardens, he saw Lila arranging flowers in one of the flower beds. "So, besides Austen, you also understand gardening?" Noah asked, approaching with a smile. Lila looked up, surprised. "It's just part of the job," she replied, going back to arranging the flowers. "But yes, I like plants." "And what else do you like?" Noah insisted, leaning slightly to see her better. Lila hesitated. She knew she shouldn't entertain conversations with her bosses, but something about Noah's light tone disarmed her. "Art," she said finally. I always wanted to study art history. History of art? This is fascinating, he said, genuinely surprised. Why aren't you doing this now? Lila laughed, humorless. Because bills to pay are more urgent than dreams to fulfill. Noah was silent for a moment, noticing the seriousness in her voice. He wasn't used to hearing such honest answers. Maybe you will realize your dreams sooner than you think, he said, trying to sound encouraging. Perhaps, Lila replied, but with a tone that indicated she didn't believe it. Later in the library, Noah was looking through some old books when he heard footsteps. When he turned around, he saw Lila organizing the books on the opposite shelf. "Are you following me?" he joked, making her turn around quickly. "I am working," she said, shaking her head. "You, on the other hand, always seem to be around." "Maybe I like good conversations," Noah replied, smiling. Lila didn't respond immediately, but then murmured, "Careful, good conversations can lead to misunderstandings." Noah laughed, but realized Lila was serious. Even so, he couldn't avoid the curiosity she aroused. At the end of the day, Lila was in the kitchen washing dishes when Noah walked by and stopped at the door. "I'm going to tell you a secret," he said, making her look up. "Secret?" she asked, suspicious. "I never really liked this world. Parties, dinners, everything seems so empty." He paused, looking at her. "I guess that's why I liked you. You're not part of this." Lila was speechless. For the first time, she felt like Noah saw her as more than just someone who worked there. It made her uncomfortable, but it also made her heart race. "Good night, Noah," she said, ending the conversation and leaving quickly. As she walked to her room, Lila tried to ignore what she felt. But I knew that deep down, something was starting to change. Lila was sweeping the mansion's main hallway when she noticed whispers coming from the kitchen. She paused for a moment, listening intently. They were the voices of other employees who seemed to be talking about her. "Have you seen how Mr. Noah is always close to the new employee?" said one of the voices. "It is clear he'd never looked at anyone like that before," replied another, with a tone of disapproval. "But we know how these things end." Lila took a deep breath, returning to work. It wasn't the first time rumors had surfaced about employers and employees, but she knew she needed to be careful. Any slip-up could put your job at risk. Later, while organizing a cabinet in the library, Noah walked in, holding some papers. "You seem tense," he said, noticing the serious expression on her face. "Just focused on work," Lila replied, without taking her eyes off what she was doing. "Is it because of the things they are saying?" he asked, approaching. Lila stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "What they say doesn't matter. The bottom line is that I need this work, and I can't afford distractions." "So you're saying I'm a distraction?" Noah asked with a playful smile. "I'm saying maybe you should stop looking for me," Lila replied firmly. For a moment, Noah was silent, clearly surprised by her response. But before he could say anything, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor. It was Evelyn Harrington, Noah's mother, with her impeccable posture and sharp gaze. "Noah, can I talk to you for a moment?" she said, completely ignoring Lila's presence. "Of course," he replied, following his mother out of the room. In the hallway, Evelyn looked directly at her son, her tone firm. "I've heard things about you and the new employee. I hope that's not true." "And if so?" Noah replied, crossing his arms. "So, you're risking our family name for something that has no future," she said without hesitation. "You know what our expectations are. Maybe your expectations are not mine," Noah replied, before walking away, leaving Evelyn alone. Later, when Lila went to her room, she reflected on what she had heard. The Harringtons' world was full of unspoken rules and social barriers. Maybe it would be better to keep her distance from Noah. But for some reason, she knew that would be harder than it seemed. Noah was on the mansion's balcony, observing the gardens in the distance. The last few days had been confusing, but Lila's behavior intrigued him more than anything. He heard low voices near the garden entrance. Two employees were talking without noticing his presence. "Do you remember that new employee's mother?" asked one of them. "Of course, Miriam Carter. Worked here years ago, but things didn't end well for her," replied the other. "Yeah, everyone remembers the scandal. It was a delicate matter," the first commented, lowering his tone even further. Noah frowned. He didn't know anything about Lila's mother, but clearly there was a story there. Entering the house, he went straight to the library, where he found Harrison, the family's oldest butler. Harrison was organizing documents when Noah entered. "Harrison, can I ask you something?" Noah began, trying to sound casual. "Of course, Mr. Noah. What do you want to know?" "Do you remember a woman named Miriam Carter?" he asked, carefully observing Harrison's reaction. The butler hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Yes, sir. She worked for her family for many years. She was a dedicated and hard-working woman." Harrison paused for a moment before continuing, "but she was fired abruptly under complicated circumstances." "What happened?" Noah insisted. Harrison looked at him warily. "I think you'd better ask your mother." The answer only increased Noah's uneasiness. He knew he needed to hear the story directly from Lila. The next day he found her in the garden, where she was taking care of some plants. He hesitated before speaking, but knew he needed to be direct. "Lila, I need to ask you something," he began. "About your mother." Lila stopped what she was doing, her posture becoming tense. "What about my mother?" he asked without looking at him. "What happened between her and my family? I heard some things, but I want to understand." Noah replied, his voice firm. Lila glared at him, her eyes flashing with anger. "Why does it matter now?" she replied. "Do you think you can fix what happened?" "No, but I think you deserve justice," Noah replied, approaching. "I just want to know the truth." She took a deep breath before starting. "My mother, Miriam Carter, worked at this mansion for almost 15 years. She took care of everything. She cleaned every corner, prepared parties, sacrificed her own health to meet her family's demands." Lila paused, her voice shaking. "But when she got sick, she couldn't work like she used to. And do you know what they did? They fired her with nothing, no help, no consideration. They just sent her away." Noah was silent, processing her words. "I didn't know," he began, but Lila interrupted him. "Of course I didn't know. Because for your family, people like my mother don't exist. We are invisible," Lila said, her voice full of emotion. "But you are not invisible to me," Noah replied, looking directly at her. "And I won't let it continue like this." Later, Noah entered his mother's office. Evelyn Harrington was sitting behind her desk, analyzing documents, but looked up when she saw her son. "Noah, what happened?" she asked, noticing his serious expression. "I need to know what happened to Miriam Carter," he said, crossing his arms. "I don't understand why this is relevant now," Evelyn replied, avoiding his gaze. "It's relevant because I met her daughter, and what you and Dad did was wrong," Noah accused, his voice rising. Evelyn sighed impatiently. "We did what we needed. I don't discuss decisions made years ago. You should forget about it. Maybe it's time to question these decisions," Noah replied firmly. "I won't ignore what happened." Back in the garden, he found Lila. She seemed calmer, but there was still a distance between them. He approached slowly, stopping beside you. "I don't want you to save me, Noah," she said, her voice low. "I spent my life learning to fight alone." "I don't want to save you, Lila. I want to fight you," Noah replied without looking away. She looked at him, and for the first time, the wall between them seemed to start to crumble. The next morning brought an unusual calm to the Harrington mansion. Lila was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the employees, when she heard unusual movement in the main hall. Curious, she followed the sounds and found Noah standing in the center of the room, wearing an impeccable suit. He was surrounded by family members, all with confused expressions. "What is happening?" Lila muttered to herself, staying in the shadows of the hallway to watch. Evelyn Harrington was positioned in front of Noah, her posture rigid and her gaze icy. "This is unacceptable, Noah," Evelyn said, her voice full of authority. "I can't believe you're doing this scene." "It's not a scene, Mom. It's a choice," Noah replied, his voice firm. "And I'm going to do it my way." Before Evelyn could retort, Noah turned to the other family members present. "I have decided that I will no longer live up to your expectations. I spent years trying to please, but in the end, I realized that I was only moving away from what really matters." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm in love with Lila Carter, and nothing you say will change that." Lila felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. His hands instinctively touched the doorframe for support. She never expected to hear that, much less publicly. Evelyn, however, wasn't surprised, just furious. "Are you willing to throw away your reputation, our family's respect, for this?" Evelyn shot, pointing in Lila's direction. Noah quickly turned around, noticing her presence. His eyes softened upon meeting her. "Yes, I am," he replied, walking towards Lila. Lila tried to step back, but he reached her hand before she could get away. "Noah, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I'm choosing you," he said without hesitation. "I don't want to live a life where decisions are made out of convenience. I want to live a life where love and truth win. And this is only possible by your side." The murmurs among the family members became louder, but Noah didn't look away from her. "I know this won't be easy," he continued, "but if you're willing, I'm here." Lila took a deep breath, her eyes teary. She knew what was at stake. "I knew his choice would cost a lot, but I also knew he was sincere. I'm not going to pretend I'm not afraid," she said finally. "But if you're willing to fight, so am I." Noah smiled, gently pulling her closer. All around, the murmurs turned into open arguments, but they didn't seem to notice. "Let's get out of here," he said softly. "What?" Lila asked, surprised. "Leave this place behind. Let's start something new, away from all this," Noah stated with conviction. Without waiting for anyone to respond, he held her hand and led her towards the main door. Evelyn tried to intervene. "You can't just leave, Noah," she shouted. "This is your home, your family." Noah stopped at the door, turning around one last time. "My home is where I am with the one I love," he replied, "and my family is something that I will build with my own values." With that, the two left together, leaving the Harrington mansion behind. The gentle breeze enveloped them as they crossed the gardens, and for the first time, Lila felt like she was heading towards something that really mattered. Noah shook his hand. "Let's build something real, Lila. Something that no one can take away from us." She smiled, for the first time feeling like the weight of the past was being left behind. "Yes, let's go." And so, together, they began a new journey, where love was not just a feeling, but a choice made every day.